Grade 11, this is the continuation of the answer of your revision sheet for biology. Number 41. The active transport of ions across the neural membrane is possible because of course, we said before that the ions, in order to pass from one point to another, they require sodium-potassium bond. So for number 41, the answer is B. Number 42. Which of the following is true of both taste buds and olfactory cells? Taste buds are the cells responsible for the taste, and the olfactory cells are the ones responsible for the smell. Okay, so both detect, of course, they detect molecules dissolved in liquid. In your nose, they are dissolved in mucus, and in your mouth, they are dissolved in saliva. Number 43. How many lobes make the brain? Your brain is made of 4 lobes. The answer is C. Number 44. Which of the following conditions will stop the cycle shown in figure 29.2? So we're going to look at this figure. There is cold exposure that's going to be transmitted to the hypothalamus. This action is transmitted to the hypothalamus. It is going to produce a hormone to the pituitary. From the pituitary, it causes the thyroid stimulating hormone that is transmitted to the thyroid. From the thyroid, it's going to release the thyroxine, which increases the cell activities, which is going to cause body warming. So the question was, which part of this following conditions will stop the cycle? Of course, the cycle will stop once the temperature of the body returns to normal. So here, let's check for the answers. The answer will be D, when the body reaches its ideal temperature. All of this loop, the aim of all of this loop is to return the body temperature to its normal levels. Number 45. What do rod and cone cells do when they are stimulated? The rods and cones are present in the retina. One is responsible for the dim lighting, and the cones are responsible for detecting the colors. So what do they do when they are stimulated? When you see colors, or when you are present in a place that is dim lit, they are going to generate an impulse. These impulses, they are taken by the optic nerve to the brain in order for your brain to translate the images that you're seeing. Okay, so starting the next questions, I'm going to explain the answers, but the full written answers are present in the revision sheet on the school website. Okay, so I'm going to explain every question with the answers, but the full explanation and the full everything is written on the answer sheet. Number 46. The nervous system is divided into central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. How is the peripheral nervous system divided into other related systems? So first of all, the peripheral nervous system is divided into 2 other systems, somatic and autonomic. Somatic, responsible for voluntary movement. Autonomic, responsible for involuntary movements. The autonomic system has 2 more systems. Here, note the question, name the 4 subdivisions of the peripheral nervous system. So we said somatic and autonomic. Somatic, responsible for voluntary movement. Autonomic, for involuntary. The autonomic system is divided into 2 other systems. One that is sympathetic, and the other which is called the parasympathetic. The sympathetic is responsible to increase the blood flow to the heart and to the lung and to the brain, and it usually works when you are under stress. The parasympathetic is responsible for reducing the stress and taking all these organs to their normal levels of activity. The second question, describe which parts of the peripheral nervous system produce an involuntary response to stress, and which parts calms the body after experiencing stress. So as I just said, the sympathetic system is responsible for increasing the blood flow to the heart and lung. So whenever you're in a stressful situation, you're going to feel your heart racing. You're going to feel that your breathing is shallow and it's increasing in rate. You're going to maybe experience some headache. All of this because of your sympathetic system. And this is actually called fight or flight response. After this stressful situation is over, it is the function of the parasympathetic system to take you back to normal, to put your body in the normal condition and it calms your heart, it calms your breathing rate, and it makes all of your systems return to their normal functioning. Number 47. We're going to talk here about the drugs. Improper use of many drugs can lead to addiction. How does the process of addiction work, and how does it create desensitization, sensitization, and build tolerance? Okay, so first of all, desensitization means that the body is adapting to the drug. It's adapting to the drug exposure. You can all experience it if you're taking, for example, an analgesic or a painkiller. If you start taking one painkiller, 2 days later you will need 2 painkillers. If you take 2 painkillers, a few days later you will need 3 painkillers for the same amount of pain. This is called desensitization. Means that the body is getting used to this specific drug, and in this case it needs more. So the body is going to adapt to the drug exposure so that normal amount of impulses will be generated. So in my case, I'm going to take a painkiller, my body is going to calm down. The next day I will need more. Why? Because my body is going to adapt to this drug. Explain the feedback loops of addiction. So the drug that increases the amount of neurotransmitter in a synapse will lead to desensitization. The next neuron reduces the number of receptors generating fewer impulses. This desensitization is going to build tolerance. So this means that the more I take, the more I need. This is the tolerance. Desensitization means that I don't feel it anymore. And tolerance means that I will need more to get the same feeling. So the a drug that reduces the amount of neurotransmitter in the synapse will lead to sensitization. Sensitization, okay, so we have a drug that increases the amount of neurotransmitter in the synapse, and we have a drug that decreases the amount of neurotransmitter in the synapse. The drug that increases the amount of neurotransmitter in the synapse will lead to desensitization, which means that larger drug doses are needed to get the same effect. While drugs that reduce the amount of neurotransmitter in the synapse will lead to sensitization. Sensitization means that the drug lowers the amount of neurotransmitter. So the brain cells increase the number of receptors generating more impulses despite the lower level of neurotransmitter. So in this case, this is what happens when you improperly use drugs. We're not talking about the addiction of drugs, but we're talking about even the regular drugs that we take on regular basis for headaches, for pain in the leg, for whatever reason. Some of them increase the release of neurotransmitters in the synapses, and some of them decrease the release of neurotransmitter in the synapses. And still, as I told you, the answers are written in full details in the answer sheet on the school website. Number 48. The digestion of food involves many feedback loops. When the food enters the stomach, the hormone gastrin is released. What is the next step shown in the upper loop? So here, the food, okay, the gastrin released. What is the next step? You just read it from the loop. This is the answer I need. Acid is released. You just read the loop. Number 49. As the pH of the stomach becomes lower, the gastrin production slows. Acid production also slows. What will happen if more food enters the stomach? So if more food enters the stomach, what's going to happen? More gastrin will be released and the cycle will begin again. So more gastrin will be released and the cycle will begin again. This is the meaning of this part. And this is the answer I want. More gastrin will be released and the cycle will begin again. Number 50. What type of feedback loop is shown here? What we see here, starting from the food entrance, okay, to the release of gastrin, to the acid released. It's going to lower the pH. What happens when you lower the pH? The gastrin is inhibited. And when the gastrin is inhibited, the acid is not released. So Whenever an action happens that leads to an opposite release of whatever the action is whatever the action, this means it's a negative feedback. So we said that if the action means more acid, this is going to be a positive feedback, but here the action means less acid, so it's a negative feedback loop. Number 50, the answer is a negative feedback loop. Number 51, when the pH of the stomach is low, pepsin is released to digest protein. The release of pepsin leads to the release of more pepsin. As we just said, this is of course a positive feedback loop. When the release leads to more release, it's a positive feedback. When the release leads to less release, this is a negative feedback. Now we go to number 52. In number 52, they ask you to predict what will happen to each loop when the meal is over. Of course, when the meal is over, each of these loops is going to end. Of course, these loops are going to end because at this point the gastrin production will stop and the pH will be restored to its set point, because this was a negative feedback loop, of course. So in this case, this is what will happen. The gastrin production will stop and the pH will be restored into its set point at the higher pH. And without any food to digest, the pepsin production will stop. So gastrin production will stop, pepsin production will stop, and the pH will be restored to its set point. Now we go to number 53. Number 53, we have here a boat, a ship, as you can see it, and we're going to answer a few questions imagining that this ship resembles our body. Number 53. A crew tries to keep a sailing ship on course despite all the changes in the sea and in the weather. How is the crew like the internal control systems in the human body? The body's internal control systems, as we already said before, they work together to maintain homeostasis despite changes in internal and external conditions. This is how the crew that wants to keep the ship moving despite the changes in the weather resembles the body. 54. Okay, number 54. What organ in the human body is most likely the captain of the ship? I don't think you need to think about that. It is the brain. Number 55. How might a sailor function in the same way that the body's communication system functions? Okay, so the sailor is going to receive a message from the captain and is going to give it to someone who controls some part of the ship. This is exactly like the sensor that receives the message, and then it's going to relay it to the brain, and then the brain is going to relay it to the target organ. 56. What information are the crew members on the ship sensing? If you look here again on the ship, and you see these rocks coming. So what happens? The lookouts search the ocean ahead for signs of dangers. The sailors check the sails and other equipments for changes in currents. So here, what do they sense? They are always sensing the changes in currents or the presence of rocks or obstacles in front of the ship. Number 57. How does the control center help to make needed changes to keep the ship on course? Who acts as the targets? Okay, so the captain is going to receive the information from the lookout and the sea and the weather conditions, and then he is going to send messages to tell the crew which are his targets, how to work together and how to do the job in order to maintain the ship on course. Number 58. Number 58, this shows an action potential. What is an action potential? This is the process of the potassium and the sodium entering and leaving the cells in order to produce a nerve impulse. What indicates the location of an action potential in this figure? The presence of sodium entering and the potassium leaving Here the sodium is entering. This indicates the presence of an action potential. The action potential is at the portion of the inner membrane that is positively charged. Okay, so this indicates the presence of an action potential. Number 59. What happens in the positively charged electric impulse when it reaches the synapse? So, the electric impulse that have traveled down the axon to the terminal on the left, the impulses, they have stimulated the vesicles to release neurotransmitters into the synapse. So what happens? They are going to stimulate the vesicles to release the neurotransmitters into the synapse. What occurs in the synapse, as we can see it, the neurotransmitters have bound to the receptors on the adjacent neurons and they stimulate a new action potential. Here, they are going to be released at the synapse. The synapse is the point where the axon and the dendrites meet. There is no actual physical connection between the ends of the nerves. There is the space, which is called the synapse, in which a chemical reaction occurs through the pumping of sodium and the pumping of potassium, and this leads to the transmission of the different messages. What occurs in the synapse in the diagram? The neurotransmitters have bound to the receptors on the adjacent neuron and they are going to stimulate a new action potential. Here it is. You have to return here and see how here the vesicles have released the neurotransmitter, and this neurotransmitter is going to be moved to here. And then when it moves to here, it is going to generate a new action potential, which is going to help transmit the impulse. Number 61. Okay. Explain how sodium and potassium move across the neuron membrane to cause a moving action potential. So the sodium channels open quickly and then the sodium rushes. Okay. As the sodium channels down the axon open, the impulse moves forward potassium channels, and then the potassium is going to flow out and the cell becomes negative again. Although both the potassium and the sodium are positive, the presence of more of each of any of them on one side, we call it a negative, we call it that the cell is becoming negative. Number 62. What causes the resting potential? What causes the resting potential shown in this diagram? What causes the resting potential is the unequal concentration of the ions inside and outside of the cell. So the difference of the charge across the cell membrane is responsible for the resting potential. Here we look at a stimulus to a neuron. Here we have the squares are for the nervous system and the circles are for the endocrine system. And here there is a stimulus to a neuron. This is also another part of the nervous system, and these are parts of the endocrine system. Here in this figure, we're supposed to have squares represents parts of the nervous system and circles, of course, represents part of the endocrine system. Name the letter of the shape that represents the hypothalamus. What do you think? The hypothalamus is C. Here it is. The hypothalamus is shown as a circle and a square because part of it works as the nervous system and part of it works as an endocrine system. The solid line, what is represented by square B? Of course, what's represented by square B is the central nervous system. Number 65. The solid line between A and B represents a physical connection between parts of the nervous system. Why are the connections in the endocrine system represented by a different way? How does the endocrine system transmit messages? Here we have solid lines because, as we explained, the nervous system is physically connected through actual nerves between different parts. While in the endocrine system, they release a hormone. This hormone circulates in the blood, and when it reaches a certain target organ, it acts on this target organ. So there is not an actual physical connection. There are hormones. So here, these are solid because it's a physical connection. and these are dashed because there is not an actual connection. They are communicating through the release of hormones. Number 66. Structure D is an endocrine gland that receives many releasing hormones and sends hormones to many other glands in the endocrine system. What is that gland? Of course, it is the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is present in the brain, and it receives releasing hormones from the hypothalamus, and then it releases these hormones to other glands in the body. Okay, name two organs that could be represented by the letter E, F, G, H, or I. Okay, so E, F, these are the glands that are controlled by the pituitary glands. It could be the thyroid, thymus, adrenals, pancreas, or gonads, which includes the testes and the ovaries. This way we have finished all of the questions in your revision sheet. As I told you, the short answers and all the written answers are present in full details on the answer sheet on the school website. I explained everything here. Thank you very much, grade 11.